Hey, good morning, everybody. Wednesday, May 21st. Welcome to another Watercooler Wednesday. Flying solo today. Duane's not able to make it, but I got a great case study for you. I've been doing these case studies and teaching this business for about 30 years now, so quite a while. And as you can imagine, over the years, I have built up literally hundreds and hundreds of case studies, and I like to track the results that my students are getting. I like to hear good stories. I like to know about stories that have a teachable lesson within them, and as always, share those with other people because what I have found is that the quickest way to learn is through the experience of other people. So if I not only expose you to my um, knowledge and background and my experiences, but also for other people. So as I train other people and they run into various solution or various problems and we come up with solutions to work with them, it makes sense to share that with everybody because then again, when they encounter something similar to that or maybe exactly like that, they know what to do. It's an actionable moment. So I look for these teachable moments in all the case studies, and I've built them over the years. I like to keep everything fresh, meaning when I do these, I like to keep new case studies all the time and show you things that are currently going on. Right now, we had a bunch of closings, as you're aware of if you follow this or follow my YouTube channel or all the social media that I do. We had a lot of closings. Now we're in that rebuilding stage. So I have a lot of deals that we are making offers on, that we are working towards contracts on, but nothing closed yet. So I don't want to show those case studies just yet. And it dawned on me. I said, there's so many of these lessons that I have, I'm going to start doing some Kevin classics as well. Go reach back and take some of these great case studies because they're still relevant today. It's just the numbers are a little bit different. The time was a little bit different, but I'm only going to bring you classics that are absolutely relevant to what's going on in the marketplace. And kicking this off with the great one. This is a case study that I talked about for years because in one case study, it envelops three different creative aspects. And it just shows you that point that I made a little bit earlier is we're problem solvers, especially when it comes to non-performing notes. So this case study I'm about to show you is a non-performing note that I helped this student creatively go through this process to come up with the best exit solution. And it's always best, by the way, to think of these exit solutions before you get in, right? And that way we can go through a number of different scenarios and be able to adapt as things start to unfold because there are some aspects of the business that, like many things, are not under your control fully. Some things are, some things aren't. So we have to mitigate our losses. We have to evaluate these things out. And we want to get to a situation where we're looking at these deals where we're making money, whether it works out on best case scenario or worst case scenario. If we're making money either way, and it just becomes a matter of how much and when, then that's a win-win, and that's the way you want to pursue this investment. So let's dig into this Kevin Classic here from several years back. I don't have a time frame on this, but this was after the crash of 2008. So this is probably a case study from around 2012. And everything that they're doing in this case study completely can be done today. So we start with the situation. The situation was this. This was a non-performing loan. There was a young man who lived in this house. I remember it clearly. He had moved out from his parents, saw a good opportunity to buy a house. Why was he able to buy a house? Well, because you could pretty much fog a mirror in those days and get a loan, right? You had stated income loans, you had all these crazy products that made it really, really super simple for people to buy houses because they could get 100% financing, right? And of course, we all know inevitably what happened with that. But that was the scenario. So this young man said, hey, I can move out. I don't need to live with my parents anymore. I'm able to get a mortgage, even though, I have a steady job, but not a well-paying job. Was able to purchase this home in Middle America. Now, again, the price on this property was only $50,000. And that was very common, back in 2010, 11, 12, 13 in the Midwest, Ohio, Indiana, all these states that we do a lot of business in today. Those houses, this house probably today, well, that'd be interesting to look up. This house today is probably worth up to three times that, but back then, a broker's price opinion on this property came back at $50,000. I don't remember exactly how much they owed on the property. It's really not relevant to the case study here, but this note was purchased for $16,000. A lot of these deals, the property values had crashed down. They owed more than the house was worth. So I don't remember if they owed 50,000 on this, 60,000 on this, 70, have no idea. It doesn't matter because when we're purchasing non-performing notes, what's more relevant, especially back then, what was more relevant was they already owe more than the house is worth. We're not bidding upon that. We're not making our offer upon that. We are making our offer based upon the collateral. Because if it's non-performing, there's probably work that needs to be done, deferred maintenance, that sort of thing. Now you can just observe this house. It was still pretty well maintained. Yeah, there's some wear and tear on the front porch and those sorts of things, but nothing that crazy on the outside, which generally reflects the inside. And the interesting, once we got this deal done, which they purchased for $16,000. Okay, so you're making $16,000 investment backed by this property. You don't own the property yet, but you do have a lien on this property. Once this was purchased, we were able to find out that the young man indeed was no longer able to make the payments. He had lost a job. He was having, some emotional issues and moved back in with mom and dad. But in the Midwest, and when they left this, they left the house in great condition. And the parents, maintained the lawn and that sort of thing because they just did that for the neighborhood. That's why the house looks like the house does. So as it started to unfold, they said, well, let's try solution number one. Because as I said, we came up with a number of solutions. Let's go with best case scenario, which is, well, let's try a loan modification. Now, at the time that we purchased this, we didn't know that the young man had moved out. That was after we purchased it. Okay. But does he want to move back in? Can he do a loan modification? In other words, can we just refashion this loan, forgive some debt, maybe do a forbearance or something like that? And that was the initial thing that we tried, but it simply wasn't going to work out. He had these emotional issues. He wasn't working at the time. So that was kind of we reached out for that and they're like, it's just not realistic. It's not going to happen. And what we did on this, instead of foreclosing, because he did owe more than the house was worth, we took a deed in lieu. That's what a DIL, a deed in lieu of foreclosure. And that was a great solution for everybody because number one, this young man's not going to have a foreclosure on his record at all. He signed the property over along with our agreement that we wouldn't pursue any debt, any deficiency judgment, anything such as that. Basically, sign the property over, everything is forgiven. You move on with your life, and we move on with the property. And that was it. And that was a great solution for everyone involved. Time wise, we didn't have to go through the foreclosure process. Expense wise, didn't have to go through any of that. So it was perfect. So you bought the non-performing loan, you reached out to the borrower was in that situation, said, hey, I'll gladly sign the property over. Beautiful. They did that. Everybody is moving on. So what do we do now? Now we own a piece of real estate. And of course, there's many options there. You could just sell it for cash. You could renovate it and sell it. You could renovate it and sell it with seller financing. You could renovate it and rent it. You could renovate and do a lease option. You could, there's a lot of different things that one could do in a situation like this. So we talked through many of these examples, and they put the property on the market. And then a young lady came around, and she was working really hard. And you can see they spruced up the house just a little bit there, fixed up the yard a little bit more, repainted the front porch, but not a whole lot of work needed to be done in this property. As I said, they left it pretty clean. So they put a sign out, and they had a call fairly quickly from a young lady, and she said, look, here's the thing. I'm working two jobs. I'm trying to improve my life, and I'm almost making enough now where I can go down to one job, and wasn't quite ready where she felt that she could purchase, and neither was my student. They kind of looked at this and said, I don't know if we don't want to set her up for failure. We don't want to structure a deal where she's buying this and now she can't afford it. And that just doesn't make sense for her, doesn't make sense for us. So why don't we do this? She seems like a go-getter. Let's put her in a lease option. Okay. And the difference between a lease and a lease option, when you're just leasing to somebody, they don't have anything in their brain says this is going to be my property, and thus they take care of it accordingly for the most part. If you have somebody in lease option where they have the option to purchase it after a point in time, let's say a year, which was in this case, she's got a year to lease this thing and then she has the right to buy it. The mentality completely changes because now they're thinking this is going to be my house. And they structured it where she was making rent payments, but she was also making payments towards a down payment because that was the other thing she didn't have was some kind of a down payment. And they didn't want to finance with zero down. Okay, great. So she's chipping away on this and making payments on time under the lease. And when the option comes up, she's like, yes, I am ready to buy. And by that point in time, she had been, given enough credit because she was paying rent plus. So that rent plus the option money that was going towards a down payment. So that she didn't have to come to the table with more money. So they made it pretty simple on her. Now, they also think about this. If we are then going to sell this property on a note, we've got some money down, right, through over the year. We're going to create this note for $53,100. Well, we have a potential issue here because if the house is now worth $55,000, okay, so it was initially worth 50,000, and let me clear that out. $50,000, but it went up in value, let's say, in a year. A smart real estate note investor is going to come in and say, well, I don't want to be in this property, in this note backed by this collateral for more than 38.5. Okay, we don't buy notes when we're in it for 95% of the value of the property. That's ridiculous. If the loan goes bad, what happens? We end up with, if we bought, let me put it this way. If they created this note, okay, let me go back to that slide here. So if they created this note for $53,100 and we paid $53,100 for that note, the house is only worth 55. What if she ends up defaulting and now we get a $55,000 house back for 53? There's no money in that. That's ridiculous. So we have to address the risk first. So we were smart enough, and I was telling my student, I said, here's the problem. If you just create a $53,100 note and you go to sell it, you're only going to get about $38,000, $37,000 for it. And then it's going to be based upon the yield that it's written on. So you're really going to take a big discount on this note, not because it's a bad note, not because that she might be a bad payer, but simply because we have to limit our exposure based upon our investment and the relationship to the underlying collateral value, okay? In case we have to take it back. We always hope for best case scenario and prepare for worse. So what's the solution? What did they do? How do we paper out, so to speak, of this $53,100? So here's the solution, and it's actually in my book. It's called, I call it the two-note solution. I said, here's the deal. You create one note, and again, you're going to get maybe 30, five, six, seven, $8,000 for it. That's it. You're going to take a big discount. So what if we identify what the issue is, which is risk to a note investor, and address it from that angle? In other words, why don't you create two notes instead of one? Create a first position note for 35,940. Why 35,940? Because that's underneath that risk threshold where now an investor is purely looking at the yield, which makes sense. So they'll get top dollar for that $35,940 note, assuming they write it somewhere around 9-10% interest. It won't take much of a discount at all to get that yield up because they address the risk first. Okay. So create a second note then for the balance. And if you add those numbers up, it comes to the $53,100. Okay. So papering it out, we did a two-note solution, not one. We created two notes. with the idea that they want to cash out of this first position note. So the idea is they're going to sell this note, the first position, and they're going to keep the second position note, which is super smart because they would have been giving up all of that money if they didn't create the second anyway. So now they're capturing that money. So they create these two notes, they sell the first one, they keep the second one. So what they're getting is the lump sum that they want, and they're also then getting monthly cash flow on the second position because the borrower starts making two payments, one for the first mortgage, one for the second mortgage. Okay, very simple. So they're getting lump sum and cash flow, much better solution. So when I outlined this technique for them and showed them that, they said, okay, we get it. It makes 100% sense. But let me ask you this. If we can sell that first position note in full, could we also just sell a partial? Meaning just sell some of those 185 payments we're going to create? Of course. Sure you can. So they said, okay, well, wait a minute. Let's run those numbers again here. We only need about 23,000 bucks. We don't need to sell that whole note. What could we just sell enough to get $23,500 out of it? Because that's really all we need out of the deal right now. And then we'll just take the rest as, as cash flow. So we backed into the numbers and we said, okay, you've got an investor who's happy with about a 9.5% interest. So let's back into the numbers here. How many payments of $333.17 would you need to sell for an investor to get 9.65% with investing $23,500? And the answer is 107 months. If you do the math, you say, if I invest $23,500 into something that's going to a cash flow machine that's going to crank out for me $333.17 a month for the next 107 months, you calculate for your yield, it's going to be 9.65. Okay. So that's how we backed into that number. So now an investor that they went to paid them $23,500 for that portion of the first position note. So they get their, if we slow down the movie at the closing, they're getting their $23,500 plus they're getting monthly payments from the second mortgage, okay, the second position loan, which is $166.73 per month. And then 107 months later, they'll also start getting $333.17 plus the 166 from the second position loan. In other words, they'll get all of that collectively together. So if I put that out on a schematic, and this is going to be hard to describe if you're not watching the video, if you're just listening to the audio on the Real Estate Without Renters podcast, might be a little hard to visualize here, but I've got this charted out here to track this because they ended up making $49,474 on this note deal. And remember, that was with the property that was worth 50 grand. Okay. It just was a matter of structuring it up. So the plus the rent and everything else they got. So they actually made over 50,000. But the first position note, they collected a couple monthly payments, right? Then they sold 107 of it to an investor. Okay, so they created both of these notes. It took them a couple of months. It took them two months to find an investor who was going to buy the 107 payments. So they collect 2 months on the first. Let's break it down. On the first position note, they collect 2 months of $333. Then they sell the 107 payments. They get their $23,500. Then after those payments are received, they get 76 payments on the back end of the note. Fantastic. On the second position, they get paid from day one, and there they kept all 185 payments of $166.73. Okay. So when you bring all of that in together, it comes to $49,474 that they received over time. Okay, plus a year of rent, which is another $7,200, and $6,800 in option money. So I stand corrected. They made over $60,000, over 60 grand on this $50,000 house. Versus, if they got this property and just sold it on a quick cash sale, again, they could have done fine, right? They remember they got this property for $16,000 and got a deed in lieu. So they're basically in this thing for 16 grand, maybe put 3,000, let's say four to round it up, $4,000 in it to spruce it up. They're in this thing for $20,000. They could have sold this thing for cash. They could have sold it really quickly for probably 40, 50, let's say $45,000 on a quick sale, and they're in it for 20 and cashed in real quick. But they turned it into something better. They turned it into something much more creative, something where they got lump sum cash that they needed. They also got monthly payments, for a long period of time, and it just made for a much, much, much better deal for them in the long run. So the two-note solution came in here really as a big problem solver. The stepping stone was getting the lease option, letting somebody prove themselves that they have the ability to make the monthly payments before you convert them over to a note and mortgage. Because at that point in time, they're on the property, right? So now you got the note and mortgage. The next problem became, well, if we create one note, we're going to take a big discount. Why do that? Two-note solution comes in, saves the day, sell part of the first or all of the first. They could have done that as well, and then just keep the second on the deal. Very, very creative, very profitable. And there's nothing in that case study that any one of you with the proper guidance couldn't do. Let's face it. They were just they strung together a couple of techniques. And that also shows why it's important to really understand the business in the totality. There's still some people who just teach, for example, non-performing notes, and you're going into deals with one arm behind your back, because non-performing, the goal is to get them reperforming again. Okay. In this case, it wasn't from the original borrower, but it became, well, let's create a note for somebody else. And how do we do that the right way? And then how do we create a note that's resellable on the other market? So it took a lot of different knowledge to come in and make this where it was really just swinging from one technique to another very, very seamlessly. But it looked and was seamless because of the knowledge background on doing that. So as investors, you really need to round out your education. You can't be a just no performing, a just no non-performing. It's the note business, and that includes performing, non-performing, sub-performing, everything else in between. Your knowledge base is there. Your focus can be on other areas, but again, you're always hoping for best case scenario and preparing for worst case scenario. So if you have all of that in play, it just, the opportunities, as I say, are always out there. So there you go with an old classic case study. And again, if you have a non-performing note, those same principles would absolutely apply today. It'd just be different numbers, right? Property values have increased. The notes are going to be bigger, all of that sort of stuff. The discounts will be a little bit different, but technique-wise, those still absolutely apply. All right, that's what I got for you today. Look, if you're interested in learning more, if you're interested in working with me directly, just shoot me an email. It's kevin@kevinshortell.com. You see my name in the corner there. Remember, it's spelled SHRTLE, but just shoot me an email, or you see it on my book right there. Kevin@kevinshortell.com. Shoot me an email. Let me know you're interested. I'll send you a link. We'll set up a 30-minute phone call, and we'll have a conversation and see if it's a right fit for you. I'll have Duane on with me again next week, and you can also reach Duane at Duane@kevinshortell.com and set up a call with him as well. And either one of us, and we will get into a conversation and see if this is the right thing for you. And if you don't have experience, don't worry about that. Sometimes that's good. Sometimes people come in with a clear slate. They don't have any preconceived notions about how the business does or does not work. They can take off and do great. But if you do have experience and you're just stuck, and you're not getting deals like we're seeing my clients get deals, give us a call. Let's have a conversation. So hope you enjoyed that. So until next Wednesday, I'll see you soon. I should have some more tip of the days. I got backed up a little bit, just haven't posted them. You'll see them there. Check out the podcast as well, Real Estate Without Renters podcast. I appreciate it. And subscribe and like, as we always say. And look forward to talking to you again real soon.